All right, so we're going to do a rare YouTube upload for me these days, but I'm going to do a list of what all the NBA teams should do this summer. I've organized these into tiers. I'm going to be explaining the amount of movement I think that each NBA team should be making in the offseason. We're just going to try to do this all the way through, so let's go. My first tier. Blow it up like bubblegum. There's only 3 teams in this zone. Teams that I think are going to make some pretty big changes, or I don't know if they are going to, but at least they should consider making some pretty big changes this summer. These are not even just rumors. It seems like these teams are locked into potentially doing this, but we'll see. Let's start with the Chicago Bulls. This is obvious. A core that has been together for a couple of seasons now. It hasn't seemed to work very well. Nikola Vucevic is a free agent, so he may end up walking, but what do you do with DeMar DeRozan and, veterans like Alex Caruso, even Zach LaVine could potentially be out there. I think that everybody's agreeing that this Bulls core has run its course, and it's probably time to do something about it, so I would not be shocked to see them make some pretty big moves. Up next, I have the Washington Wizards, also in this group. This is a team that has been very mediocre for a very long time, and they just need to finally commit to doing this tank. They can't just sit here with like the 8th pick every single year and hope to build a team that way, especially when they don't draft super well and trade away a lot of the guys that they do end up drafting, guys like Rui Hachimura, stuff like that. So the Wizards, I think, just need to probably trade Bradley Beal, although that contract doesn't look amazing at this point. Get rid of a lot of their vets and fully commit to just tanking for the next couple of years and see where that can take them. The other one, Toronto Raptors. This is the last team in this tier. Toronto, kind of similar to both of these two teams. There's a reason they're all there together, but the Raptors have kind of been going at it with the same core ever since they won the title and Kawhi left. But this roster, it's an interesting roster construction. A lot of like big wings and centers that maybe don't necessarily fit super well together. They already got rid of Nick Nurse as their coach. They're going to bring in somebody else. I would not be shocked to see them entertain trades for guys like OG Anunoby, Pascal Siakam, Fred VanVleet. All of those guys were in rumors at the trade deadline, and I think that could make some sense for them to be moved this summer. So that's going to complete the blow it up like bubblegum tier, because these are really the only teams in the league that I think are like decent to solid, that have pieces that a lot of other teams would want that are clearly in this group. So let's move on to my next tier, and that is the Wario Land Shake It tier. Great game on the Wii, by the way. Wario Land Shake It. So this is teams that is going to be, trying to make some moves, some pretty significant moves. It's not necessarily going to be a blow it up, but more of a restructuring, right? Kind of shaking up the roster a little bit. No core pieces are probably going to move or change hands, but teams that really need to take a hard look in the mirror and decide what they're going to want to do for their franchise moving forward. These are typically good rosters, teams that have had playoff success, but it seems like they've kind of hit a wall with the current iteration of their team and kind of need to try to mix things up a little bit. So I'm going to go with the Philadelphia 76ers is the first team. Pretty obvious choice there for Philly. I think that we've all seen the rumors about James Harden leaving, potentially going back to Houston. I think that's probably going to end up happening. But other than that, they're going to have to find a way to kind of restructure this roster around Joel Embiid. You finally have Tobias Harris entering the last year of his contract. So potentially that's a little bit more tradable than it was a few years ago. They've been trying to move him ever since Daryl Morey got there. And I think the fact that he's in his final year makes that a little bit more likely. And you can just try to kind of figure out a different way to structure this roster around Joel Embiid. Does he ask for a trade this summer? I don't think so. He still has too many years left on his contract, so I don't think we're quite to that point yet. But it's clear that Philly needs some organizational changes. Obviously, firing Doc Rivers and stuff like that. We're going to see a markedly different Sixers roster next year, and I think that's for the better. Let's go next to the Memphis Grizzlies. I think this one might be a little bit controversial, but I think this team needs a pretty significant shakeup. Not from any of their core guys. You're holding on to Jaren Jackson and Desmond Bane and, John Morant, despite his off-court troubles, still a core part of this franchise moving forward. But outside of those guys, I think we're going to see some pretty significant movement on the Memphis Grizzlies roster. I think they need a culture change. I think they need to really kind of figure out what kind of team they want to be. It's been a young, up-and-coming team for a couple of years now, but not a lot of playoff success to speak of for that. Obviously, a first-round exit this year, pretty disappointing in terms of where some people thought they could be as the 2 seed in the Western Conference. So I think the Grizzlies are going to shake things up. Outside of their core 3, I think we're going to see some pretty big movement, and a lot of this might depend on how significant the suspension ends up being for Ja Morant going into next year. So let's go to the next team here, the Milwaukee Bucks. I don't think this team, maybe compared to some of the other teams in this tier, I don't know how massive their changes are going to be, but I think they're going to look at potentially moving one of Chris Middleton or Drew Holiday. Both of those guys kind of coming down to near the end of their contracts, in their mid-30s, and a first-round exit for the team with the best record in the league is certainly going to prompt some change. They've changed their coach as well, firing Mike Budenholzer there. So this team is probably going to look at some movement with their bigger contracts being Middleton and Holiday. You're keeping Giannis and figuring everything else out from there. I think everyone else on the roster could potentially be up for a move, and we're going to see the Bucks look at something like that. Up next here, let's go to the Boston Celtics. As I'm recording this, it's the day of Game 4 of the Eastern Conference Finals, so their season isn't over yet, but it might as well be. They're going to lose to the Miami Heat in potentially 4, 5, 6 games, whatever. By the time you're watching this, maybe we know, but big disappointment for the Celtics. The way that they've gone out against the Heat, obviously that big blowout in Game 3, not a good look. This is a team that's really been going at it with the same core for probably close to 6 or 7 years now. I know that people think of this as a pretty young team, and it still is, but they've been through a lot of battles together already. The Tatum and Brown core obviously went to the finals last year. They've been in the Eastern Conference Finals multiple times, and it's just kind of getting to the point with this team where you're like, what is the ceiling here? Can they really win the finals? Because it looked like they could for a couple of points here, even this season and going back to last year. But never quite could get over the hump, and maybe this last, beat down by the Miami Heat is going to make them look at a movement for one of their core stars. I don't think it'll be Tatum. If somebody's going to leave, it's probably Jaylen Brown, and especially with the big contract extension decisions coming up for both of those guys. That's going to be this summer, talks on an extension for Jaylen Brown, next year for Jason Tatum. They've both made All-NBA, and with the new CBA, those contracts are upwards of $300 million. So, are the Celtics, do they have an appetite for paying both of those guys huge money, and not having many resources to fill out the rest of the roster? That's a big question. I think they could potentially look into moving Jaylen Brown. So let's move on here to the LA Clippers, another team in this tier. They've been going at it with Kawhi Leonard and Paul George for like 5 years now, and pretty much every season it's ended with one of them being injured. I think except for like 1 year, they have had one or both of them hurt to end the season, and it's not been pretty. So, another first round exit here. It was like, 5 games? They didn't get it to 6, right? I think 5 games against the Suns. They just can't stay healthy, and that's not necessarily anybody's fault, but do they look at moving Paul George? Do they look at moving Kawhi Leonard? Is this a blow-it-up scenario? I don't quite think so. They'll probably try to restructure and retool a little bit. They have some contracts to maybe move around. They just traded for Eric Gordon. I think he has maybe a year left on his contract. I think Marcus Morris probably has 1 year left. So they have some options, but not really a ton of draft picks to speak of. So the Clippers might be stuck between a rock and a hard place here. We'll see where they end up going. And then the last team in this tier, I don't know if I really love them here, but I'm going to put the New York Knicks. I think you could maybe justify having them in the Fix-It Felix tier, which we'll get to. But I'm going to put them up here just because I think they're going to look at moving Julius Randle. This is a core that I think works. Jalen Brunson, home run signing. RJ Barrett looked a lot better in the playoffs this year. They have some depth pieces, guys like Quentin Grimes that I really like. But Randle consistently kind of seems to struggle in the postseason. He has the past couple of years that he's been with the Knicks. And I just think that they have to probably look at getting that contract offloaded and bringing in something else that maybe fits their team a little bit better, that you can kind of build the core a little bit more efficiently around Jalen Brunson and get him guys that kind of play more to his strengths. I don't I don't think him and Randall ever really worked perfectly together. So I think we could see them looking at a Julius Randle trade, and that would qualify as a pretty big shakeup for them. So that's why I have them here. And now let's move on to the Fix-It Felix here. So this is basically teams that I think need to, not necessarily a big roster shakeup, but they clearly have some holes. They have, some clear spots on their roster where they can upgrade or add somebody. I don't necessarily think that they can go win the title with their current roster. Maybe some of these teams could, but I think you clearly need something to kind of push you over the edge and get you back into competition. So not necessarily a big trade, but a small move or a couple of small moves away from being pretty solid, or at least kind of, getting them back on the right track. So let's start here with the Cleveland Cavaliers. Interesting season for them. I thought they were going to be better in the playoffs than they were. Pretty bad loss to the Knicks in the first round. It was a bad matchup. They just didn't really play well, and got out in 5 games, I think it was. This is a young core. It's a very young core. They have 4 guys, Evan Mobley, Donovan Mitchell, Darius Garland, and Jared Allen. 4 guys who are going to grow together. Hopefully you can keep them together for a couple of years and really, have them grow up and grow into a real title contender on the same roster. All those guys are under contract for long term. They've signed most of those guys to extensions. So this is a Cavs core that we're going to see for a while. But outside of those 4, that's 2 guards and 2 bigs. So you really could use a wing. And they were hoping it would maybe be Karis LeVert or Isaac Okoro or Dean Wade or Jetty Osman. But none of those guys really ended up contributing at the level that they needed them to in the playoffs. So I'm expecting the Cavs to go out and look for a high-quality 3-and-D wing. We'll see what they can make happen out there on the market, whether that's through the draft. They don't have their pick this year, so we'll see on that. Or in free agency, don't have a ton of financial avenues in order to get somebody of a huge caliber there. But I think the Cavs are mostly going to stay the course, just really need to find that high-level wing that can kind of complete this starting 5 and make it all make sense for them. I think that they're one relatively significant piece away from being a pretty good team. And then let's move on here to the next one, Minnesota Timberwolves. This was clearly a flawed roster from the beginning. The Rudy Gobert trade, a lot of people are ripping that one to shreds right now, but it was just the first season. They had Cat missed a lot of time, some other injuries here and there, and it just never really quite gelled all the way together. Got into the first round against a really good Denver Nuggets team, and they just clearly weren't good enough. So does this roster make a big shakeup? I don't necessarily think so. I could maybe see them trading Karl Anthony Towns, in which case that would put them up here, obviously, but I don't think that they're going to do that. I think they're mostly going to keep their core together, try to maybe restructure their depth a little bit to fit better around Anthony Edwards, because he's clearly established himself as the best player and the star on this team. They're going to be focusing more on building around him rather than Karl Anthony Towns at this point. So we're going to see the Timberwolves look into making a couple of moves around the margins, but I don't necessarily think it's going to be anything huge. Just kind of fixing this roster up a little bit and preparing for another big leap from Edwards as he continues to grow and prove himself as a superstar player. All right, so let's move on to the next team, and that is going to be the Atlanta Hawks. I have them, I think they're really similar to Minnesota, actually, in a strange way. Made a big trade last summer, didn't necessarily go where they wanted to go in terms of a playoff run, but I think the Hawks, I'm not actually repulsed by this roster. I think that they actually have some upside here. I know that, people have kind of talked about trading Trae Young. I don't think they'll do it. They just got DeJounte Murray there. I think that DeJounte Murray's a good player, and I think he actually works well with Trae. It just didn't quite reach the ceiling that they were hoping for in terms of the playoff run, but I still like a lot of the pieces that this Hawks roster has. I just think they need some shakeups. They've been talking about trading John Collins for 5 years now. I think they need to finally just push the button and get it done. You can maybe look into a Clint Capella trade. You have Onyeka Okongwu kind of waiting there, potentially wanting to take over the starting spot. They have some pieces. I think the Hawks can end up being pretty solid in the East next year if they're smart this summer. I don't hate the roster. I think it just needs a little bit of tweaking, and they should be all right. Let's move on here. I don't know. The Hornets are pretty much the only bad team in this group. The rest of these rosters are at least playoff contenders. But I have Charlotte here because I think they maybe need a little bit of a culture change and kind of trying to fix some of the problems that this roster has. They can end up being pretty decent next year. Now, they have the number 2 overall pick. That's a big asset for them, and they're going to probably spend it on either Brandon Miller or Scoot Henderson. I've gone back and forth on it, but I think I would go with Scoot if I was Charlotte. I think he could fit next to LaMelo, and it would create a pretty dynamic offense. They'd be really fun to watch. So, end up drafting Scoot. You have a roster with LaMelo and Scoot in the backcourt. And then maybe Miles Bridges is coming back from his, all the stuff that he was dealing with. Whatever. We'll see if he ends up getting a big max contract. Guys always never seem to quite get, what maybe they deserve in terms of legal action. But whatever. That's neither here nor there. So maybe Miles Bridges coming back. You have like a Gordon Hayward contract that you can still move. I believe Kelly Oubre is hitting free agency, so you can't move his contract anymore. But a couple of guys that they could trade, maybe Terry Rozier, throw him in there as well. And then the number 2 pick, I'm assuming it's going to be Henderson, and this could end up being a pretty decent team next year. I just think that they kind of need to fix the roster, make a couple of trades. It's going to be a pretty big summer for them. They're not really in a rebuild right now, even though they're pretty bad. I wouldn't consider this a rebuild because they don't have like a ton of assets from other teams coming in. They don't have all these future first round picks and stuff like that, like some of these other pretty bad teams do. So it's an interesting spot for Charlotte. They have talent on the roster. We'll see if they can maximize that. So that's why I have them here. And then I have a trio of teams that I kind of consider to be in the same zone. I'm just going to kind of talk about all of them at the same time. Phoenix Suns, Los Angeles Lakers, and Golden State Warriors. I talk about these 3 teams together because they're middle of the pack, pretty solid Western Conference teams with aging superstars on their roster. Obviously Durant, LeBron James, Steph Curry. And the problems that each of these 3 teams have is a little bit different, right? Because with the Suns, to me, it's a clear lack of depth. Makes sense. You traded the farm for KD, and outside of him and Booker, you don't really have a ton of pieces that you're super confident in. They're going to look to move Chris Paul. They're going to look to move DeAndre Ayton. I would be shocked if DeAndre Ayton returns to the Suns next season. I imagine they're going to look to trade him. Chris Paul, it's kind of up in the air with his partial guarantees and his contract and all that. It kind of makes it a complicated situation. But Suns, I think next year is the year that they kind of start to look scary. Because in my opinion, it's almost impossible to rebuild your entire roster in the middle of the year at the trade deadline. And that's basically what they tried to do with that trade for KD. It just completely restructured what they thought they had. And this summer gives them a chance to sign free agents that better fit around what they have. See what you can get back for Ayton and Chris Paul and maybe Landry Shamet in there as well. And kind of rebuild this roster around the new look that you have. So Suns are going to have to do some pretty big tweaks, but I think it's still mostly just fixing the roster around the new core that they have rather than a big shakeup, if that makes sense. In the Lakers' case, don't have a ton of guys under contract. Now there's questions about whether LeBron's going to retire. I doubt that very much. I just kind of think it's a leverage play for him to say that. I'd imagine that he's back in the fall, along with Anthony Davis. Some pretty big free agency decisions with guys like Austin Reeves and Rui Hachimura, both of them hitting restricted free agency. How much are you willing to pay them? D'Angelo Russell also hitting free agency this summer, probably going to let him walk. Are you interested in a guy like Kyrie Irving? This was a good team. They got to the conference finals. Obviously, the sweep is disappointing, but from where they were at the start of the year, in order to get them here, it's a pretty big accomplishment. And so I think the Lakers are mostly going to try to double down on getting some more youth onto the team, re-signing their own restricted free agents, and try to move forward with a slightly different roster than the one they had this year. But it's still probably going to be a pretty solid team next year, assuming that LeBron does return. And then for the Warriors, it's going to be interesting. Draymond Green potentially hitting free agency this summer. The reports are suggesting he's going to be back. You have Klay Thompson heading into an extension year. I think they might talk about an extension with him if the price is right for that. He's not going to be making $40 million anymore, but if you can kind of talk him down from that number, you can maybe make something happen. Is there a trade for Jordan Poole? Is there a trade for Jonathan Kuminga? Those are the questions that the team's going to have to answer. Poole, I still believe in Jordan Poole. I really do. I know he had a bad season, but we saw him make huge plays in big moments during the finals run last year. He was key. I don't think they win the title without him. And so I still believe in Jordan Poole to have a bounce back year next season. And I still like Jonathan Kuminga as well. I think that he can end up being a really good contributor. Hopefully he gets a chance to actually play in the playoffs next season. We'll kind of have to see how this year goes for him. Moses Moody showed some flashes in the minutes that he got, especially in the Lakers series. So I'm high on their youth still. I think it's going to be just a matter of getting the right veterans and just finding some more depth somewhere, because they wasted a lot of roster spots this year, unfortunately, with guys like Andre Iguodala not playing a ton of games, Ryan Rollins, a rookie, same with Patrick Baldwin. They left the last spot open until the very end of the year and signed Anthony Lamb, so they just didn't quite have the depth that they could rely on heading through the season, and I think you can find guys that can contribute for you off the bench throughout the regular season to help get you through 82 games. I think you can find those guys on minimum contracts, so I'm hopeful that the Warriors will be able to get some guys that can help them a little bit more in those moments. So that's why I have them here. Kind of need to fix the roster a little bit. I don't anticipate any huge moves. If anything, it's going to be a Jordan Poole trade, but I still don't think they'll do it, and just kind of trying to get this roster back to where it was last year. And then the final team that I have in this tier is the New Orleans Pelicans. This team is, they have injury questions. That's really been the big thing with Zion Williamson. He has not been able to stay healthy. But when he's been on the court, he's been awesome. And putting him with Brandon Ingram and the rest of the guys that they have, this has been a team that's had a really high ceiling when they've had guys be healthy. But the reality of the situation is that hasn't happened. So it's interesting. I didn't really know where to put them. I think that they could be in any of these three bottom tiers here. They're not going to make any huge trades, I don't think. It's mostly just going to be trying to keep this roster together, at least for one more season. See if you can maybe get a healthy year out of Zion. At least get him healthy going into the playoffs and see what you can do. Because like I said, it's a really high ceiling of a team when they're healthy. It's just you cannot bank on that. But I think the team is young enough and everybody's kind of got enough patience that they can at least sit through one more year of the current iteration of the roster. Just maybe trying to find some more regular season depth to get them through 82 games. Like I said, if Zion's going to miss some time, whatever. But just finding some more pieces that you can kind of feel confident in going into the playoffs, developing some of the younger guys, guys like Dyson Daniels I really like, Herb Jones, Trey Murphy III, stuff like that. I think their young core is really solid. It's just about developing them and getting them ready for big playoff moments and stuff like that. Okay, so let's move on to Choose Your Own Adventure. These are four teams that has a crossroads ahead of them. They have two paths that they can potentially go down, and they need to decide which way they're going to go. So first, the most obvious team is going to be the Portland Trailblazers. This is a roster that they are stuck between two worlds right now. Got the third overall pick in the draft lottery. That's a big asset for them. It could potentially be used on a guy like Brandon Miller, maybe Scoot Henderson if the Hornets pass up on him. Even Amen Thompson is in the conversation there for that pick. So do they want to stay and make that pick, hopefully draft their star of the future? Damian Lillard says no, he doesn't want them to. He wants them to move that pick in a trade. Essentially, at least from my perspective, he's made it clear it's the pick or me, right? They have to choose. If they're not going to trade that pick, potentially trading Lillard away and kickstarting a full rebuild could be interesting to see them go through. But if they want to try to build a roster around Lillard for the last couple of years of his career, get some more veteran help in there, that's a big trade piece to potentially be out there on the market. I think there's a lot of teams that could be interested. They could be a trade partner for one of these top three teams up here, Bulls, Wizards, or Raptors, teams that are going to blow it up. I like the potential fit of Pascal Siakam in Portland. So we'll see if which way they want to go. Let's move on next here, the Houston Rockets. been going through a rebuild for the past couple of years, but they've now hired Ime Udoka. He's made it clear he wants to win right away, so I think they're going to be making some more win now moves and kind of getting themselves into the mode of trying to at least contend for the play-in tournament out west. Try to just not, I think the past couple of years for the Rockets have been no hoops, just vibes. They've just been out there just shooting around, breaking people down on offense. Jalen Green, Kevin Porter Jr. doing all these flashy dribble moves and stuff like that. But it's clear there hasn't been a big emphasis on actually winning basketball games for Houston. And I think their culture, they really need a big reality check right now. I think the Rockets, they have all these young guys, they have a lot of talent, but no set culture, no set structure for those guys to grow and develop. They could use some veterans. I think Udoka is probably the right move in terms of hiring a coach, aside from his off-the-court stuff, right? But bringing him in, I think, as a guy who can potentially be a culture setter for them. Are you going to sign James Harden is the other big question, because all the rumors are that he wants to go back to Houston, and if they're willing to pay him that big money, it's probably going to happen. But for a team like the Rockets, is that really what you want, right? Do you want James Harden to be your veteran, your guy that you're catering to? I know the city loves him and he loves the city back, but is that really the direction you want to go down as a franchise? I have my concerns. Looks like it's probably going to happen. So that's where the choose thing comes in, right? Do you want to continue with this rebuild and continue trying to get high draft picks? They got number 4 this year to potentially use on somebody, or is this a situation where you're wanting to try to, at least start jumping into playoff contention for next season? I think that option is more likely with the hiring of Udoka, probably bringing in Harden. Maybe, there's even been rumors they want to trade the 4th pick. I don't think they will, but we'll see. It might be time to start thinking about winning in Houston after they've been bad for like 3 or 4 years now. Moving on, the Brooklyn Nets are another team in this tier. They're kind of stuck between a rebuild and still trying to remain a solid playoff team. Ended up getting into the playoffs. A lot of that was off the back of the work that Durant and Kyrie Irving had done prior to the trade deadline. It's a relatively unprecedented situation. We've never really seen a team that's been pretty solid, playing at a high level, end up trading away their 2 best players at the deadline. Still made the playoffs, obviously ends in a sweep against Philly. They just were not good enough. The roster wasn't there. But you have your star in Mikal Bridges now. I know a lot of teams out there are really going to try to trade for him, but I don't think they should make him available. Probably just hold on to him and try to move forward with him as the core of your next iteration of the franchise. You have decisions on guys like Cam Johnson coming up in free agency. A lot of veterans left over on the roster from the previous era, right? Seth Curry is going to be hitting free agency. Joe Harris, I think, maybe has 1 year left on his contract. They made the weird trade for Royce O'Neal last summer as well. There's other guys I'm probably forgetting. This team has some vets left over. Is it just going to be a fire sale? Trade those guys away, switch up the roster, rebuild it around Mikal Bridges? Do they entertain trade offers for Mikal Bridges? Like I said, I don't think they should. Even Spencer Dinwiddie could be a guy that you end up moving this summer as well. So Nets have a couple of directions they could go. They also don't have their own draft picks. They've traded some to Houston and stuff like that. So a lot of their own first round picks are tied up in other trades, so you can't really do a full-on tank. But the current roster obviously doesn't have a superstar, so they're not going to be contending for titles either. So interesting direction for Brooklyn. We'll kind of see which way they're going to be leaning this summer. The final team in this tier, I have the Dallas Mavericks. Now, this doesn't mean that they're going to entertain a Luka Doncic trade or anything like that, but it's really going to come down to, are you going to pay Kyrie Irving? When they made the trade for him, is he going to want to stay? How much money is that? There's rumors on a handshake agreement for like a 4-year, $200 million contract. That's a lot of money for a guy that hasn't exactly proven to be the best locker room guy. And maybe didn't fit the best with their team, but I view them almost kind of similar to the Phoenix Suns, where they made a big trade in the middle of the season, but it's almost impossible to make your roster make sense when you're making such a big trade, with just like 2-3 months to go left in the regular season. So I never expected the Mavericks to go anywhere this year, but missing the play-in entirely was still a pretty colossal disappointment for them. So the Mavericks have to choose. Do you want to bring back Kyrie? If you do, what's the other trade? There's rumors about DeAndre Ayton. You could potentially package some contracts and get him on the roster. Is there somebody else out there? What are you doing with Christian Wood? I believe he's also hitting free agency this summer. So big questions for the Mavericks. And, it's not necessarily choosing between a rebuild and contention, but which type of roster do you want to have going forward when it comes to building around Luka? That's going to be the big question for the Mavericks this summer, and they have a couple of different directions that they could go. And then finally, this last tier, full steam ahead. Pretty, self-explanatory. These teams are mostly just going to stick to their guns, keep the continuity on their roster, keep the trajectory that they're going in, keep the direction that they're headed in, and just, basically run it back next season and see if they can improve in any way. So I'm going to start just with the two finals teams, Denver and Miami. Self-explanatory. You get to the finals, it's mostly going to be a run-it-back season 99% of the time, especially for Denver. Win or lose, this is a roster that works. They're healthy. This feels like their season. If they win the finals, obviously, it's pretty much just going to be, let's just keep the same roster next season, no questions asked. If they lose, maybe you look at a small move, but I think for the most part, this is a Nuggets core that's been through it together, and getting to the finals is a big accomplishment for this team. So I think regardless of whether they win or lose it, we're going to see a very similar Nuggets roster next year. The Heat, I think, have a few more questions than the Nuggets do. A lot of this depends win or lose, of course. If they do end up winning the finals, they still haven't technically gotten past Boston yet, but they're going to win that series. Win the finals, you're going to run it back, keep the same roster, keep it moving. If you lose, you maybe look at a Kyle Lowry trade or Duncan Robinson's contract potentially. Even Tyler Hero, the questions about him are bigger now because he's missed the whole playoff run and they've looked better without him. If he comes back in the finals and they lose, that's an even stronger narrative for potentially looking into a trade for Tyler Hero. So I think they could maybe ask some questions about that depending on how this finals appearance goes. But for the most part, it's going to be a very similar Heat roster for next season as well. Other teams here, the Spurs, they won the lottery. They could have a relatively significant roster shakeup this summer, but it's not like this is a roster that needs to be kept together anyway, right? They were the worst team in the league, or second worst, something like that. Bottom three for sure. And, they're going to have Victor Wembanyama now, and their young core is going to consist of him. Anybody else that they can maybe pick up in the draft this season, they have picks going forward. And then as well as guys like Jeremy Sohan, Devin Vassell, Keldon Johnson, Trey Jones even. Those are the young guys that they've shown something. A couple of those guys they've already signed 2 extensions. And you're just going to plop Wembanyama in there, maybe sign a couple of veterans and tip the ball up and see what you can do. It's going to be a really fun season for the Spurs. We'll see how they look. The other one, Sacramento Kings. This is the other good team that's in this group. Great successful season for them. I don't think the fact that they were out in the first round is going to deter them from keeping this roster together. Obviously made the playoffs for the first time in a long time. Really fun season. They're a super fun team to watch. They made a lot of smart moves. De'Aaron Fox has leveled up into a superstar now. As a Warriors fan, he will forever strike fear in my heart every time we have to play them because his performance in that series was amazing. I think there's maybe some questions about Domantas Sabonis in the playoffs, but the Kings are not going to be asking them this summer. That's maybe for 2 or 3 years down the line. But for now, they're just going to bask in the excitement of having an up-and-coming team, and the Kings are going to keep this thing moving. Similar deal with OKC. Obviously not as successful. Didn't end up making the playoffs. They lost in the play-in, but they have 1 million first-round picks. Shai Gilgeous-Alexander is a superstar now. Other young guys like Josh Giddey, even Lou Dort. Chet Holmgren coming back, making his NBA debut next season after he missed his rookie year with injury. Going to be an exciting year for the Thunder. They have a ton of picks to make potential trades if they want to, but I think we're mostly just going to see this team continue to grow organically, draft some more guys. Maybe you move up in the draft if there's somebody you really like, cash in some of those assets and move up. You trust Sam Presti there. So really no big questions for the Thunder this summer. Similar deal with the Utah Jazz. They've got a ton of picks going forward. Lauri Markkanen established himself as a really nice player for them. Same with Walker Kessler coming off his rookie year. I like Ochai Agbaji as well. They have a top 10 pick as well in this upcoming draft. I trust their scouting department. I think that they're pretty well run. The Jazz are going to end up, mostly just sticking to the roster that they have right now. They figured out their core. Maybe some of the veterans you could see on the move, guys like Jordan Clarkson, whatever else. But I think the Jazz are mostly going to be keeping this thing together and continuing this rebuild along. It was successful in the first year, so why wouldn't you just keep going? Orlando Magic also have a very talented young roster. Paolo Banchero, Franz Wagner, other guys as well. I believe they have the 6th pick in the draft, 6, 7, something like that, somewhere in that range. So they're going to be able to add another young contributor. They also have the 12th or 13th, whatever the pick from the Bulls ended up being. So they have 2 lottery picks that they can use to add some more young talent. They're probably looking for shooting. So maybe a guy like Grady Dick from Kansas could be an option for them. There's a lot of other guys in the mock draft world. But the Magic, successful young core right now. They look like they're going to be really scary in a couple of years. And they're just going to keep it rolling. Indiana Pacers, very similar deal to some of these other teams here. Tyrese Halliburton looks amazing. Benedict Mathurin had a really good rookie year. You just signed Miles Turner to a pretty significant extension there for the next couple of seasons. So Pacers, didn't get a ton of lottery luck. Would have been really awesome to see them move up maybe into the top 2 or 3 and get one of those top flight prospects. But they're still going to be able to add somebody and keep this thing going. Just recently started their full rebuild, and I'm excited to see where this goes because I really love Halliburton as a player. And then lastly, the Detroit Pistons. I think this one is maybe debatable. I think you could put them in the fix-it tier or even the choose-your-own-adventure tier, but for now I'm going to leave the Pistons here. Unfortunate year injury-wise for Cade Cunningham. Only played like 5 or 6 games with that shin injury. But hopefully he comes back and has a really good season. Obviously was the first overall pick, has a ton of talent. They're going to have him blossom into a star if they want to become the team that they think they can be. They've got a lot of other young pieces as well. Jalen Duren looked pretty good. Made the trade for James Wiseman. You can kind of see what he is maybe. Who knows? Isaiah Stewart as well. Lots of other young guys on this roster. Jaden Ivey, throw him in there. They've got a young core. I don't necessarily know that it fits entirely. We're going to kind of have to see this coming season. And hopefully they can win more games than they did last year. The Cade injury really, dampered this roster and made them look terrible. I think the talent that they have, they should probably be closer to like 30, 35 wins than like 20. And I'm hoping to see a little bit of a jump from this Pistons core going into next season. But for right now, probably just going to keep things mostly the same, mostly run this back. So there you go. There's my NBA team and their off-season and what everything's going to look like for them tier list. Hopefully you guys enjoyed it. This is probably a pretty long video, but that's okay. I'm going to try to upload more this summer. I graduated college and I'm looking for things to do. So still like talking about the NBA, and we'll probably be back on Splash City a little bit more this summer. Catch me over on TikTok for more frequent uploads. But yeah, there's that. So see ya.